you the host?
I clicked the button.
Yes, cool. Okay, let's start. And David, do you want to share what you found with the team? Because this is kind of like the follow-up as last time we talked about the issue, PR charge, and the director will continue discussing. We haven't have the proposal yet, but this is the good start. Thanks.
Yep. So Don and Derek and Seth and I chatted about sort of what we think some of the most important things are for the SIG. And one of the things that came up is that as a first step, we'd like to have a better idea of how we're doing in terms of reviewing pull requests that come into the SIG. So I went and looked at, there's a cool site called DevStats, and there's some SIG specific graphs that break things down by SIG that exist. And so I just took a look at those and compiled the ones that we have. I can go through them really quickly. I'll give a brief summary of my findings, which is that we had a significant increase in open PRs and a decrease in the number of pull requests that we were reviewing and approving around sort of the December to March or April time. But since then, we have been reviewing PRs pretty steadily and have reduced our backlog significantly, although that has leveled off sort of recently. So I can just go over some of the graphs, but everyone can obviously click on them themselves. So this is sort of illustrating what I was talking about, which is that we had a significant spike. Let me see if I can show the timeline. So this is the beginning of 2020 here. So we did have a spike during the initial few months of 2020, but we've largely made our way through those PRs. The one thing that was a little bit alarming here is the stalled PRs, which there aren't a ton of. So this is probably something that we could attack in an afternoon or in a separate triage meeting. But we do have, I think, a large number of PRs that just haven't been touched in a year. So we might want to go through and triage those or figure out why those are stalled. Some of the other interesting bits, if I look at the workload, we've had a pretty steady workload over the past year. They do have this cool, let's see, where's the reviewers? This is the number of SIG reviewers. So you can actually see that we had a drop off in the number of reviewers over the same period of time that we saw an increase in the number of open PRs. So that probably suggests that there were fewer people who were actively reviewing PRs during the early months of 2020. The other links I'd like to point out, these probably changed since I looked at them last week, but here are some hopefully helpful links to PRs that need approval for those of us who are approvers in SIG Node, as well as those that are open and are looking for review and are tagged with Node. So if you're looking for a place to get started or to find more PRs than the bot auto assigns you from being on the reviewers list, you're always welcome to take a look at the PRs that are open and are ready to go but need a review. Any questions?
I got a random one.
Yeah.
Usually in DevStats, you can also see how much people are contributing. Do we know how much how active approvers are? I'm asking because just to give more context, I'm asking because usually it is the case that people get overloaded or they switch jobs and the like, and people who are approvers in some places they stay as approvers, but they're not actually as active.
Yep.
Fun fact: if anyone is actually interested in going through a lot of owner files in Kubernetes, it's like Joe Beda, still an approver, and he still requested for review and approval in a lot of PRs, even though he's not actually he's not actively contributing to the project anymore.
Yep. It doesn't. So I think there were 25-ish open PRs that needed approval right now that are tagged with SIG Node, and all of those had an approver from Don, Derek, myself, or Seth assigned, and looked like they were making progress. So it didn't look like at least any of the PRs that were eligible for approval right now were blocked on us. I looked at the dev stats. I found something interesting, which is that it didn't seem to have all of us. I could find myself, I could find Derek, I could find Seth, but I couldn't find Dawn for whatever reason, and I couldn't find a number of the other approvers that are perhaps less active today. So I don't know if we're just missing stats for particular people, or what the deal is. But I know Dawn approves PRs, but she didn't show up in dev stats. So I can try and it does. I don't know if it does. I think I only looked in Kubernetes. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for the points. What I've done actually, so hopefully we can make this sort of a 2-minute or shorter, kind of piece at the beginning of SIG meetings. I've added a SIG health portion of the meeting notes at the top. So I'm not going to keep the meeting notes from today updated, but if you have other links that you think would be useful, especially things like how active are our approvers, I think is a really useful metric to have. There's only these 4. I think so there's a question from Morgan. If there's only 4 approvers, which to reiterate are Dawn, Derek, myself, and Seth, can we shadow along to become approvers eventually? Dawn or Derek?
Yeah, so there's actually probably still some other approvers who might be taking either temporary assignment elsewhere, or I'm not sure if they will be coming back in the near term, but have a large historical knowledge of the code base. So we'd have to follow up with some of those individuals, and I think among the group of us here, we can kind of take a health check assessment on what their near-term assignments are. As for bringing up new approvers, I think the answer is yes, always. We'd love to get help and have folks shadow. The only caveat on that is we want to make sure that people have some historical knowledge to the project to know past decisions well. So the most recent enhancements for Seth and David to get elevated kind of captured their long-term engagement. And so, but for anyone who wants to help get on board with approving and getting that historical context, I think all of us would love to help facilitate and accelerate that.
The other thing I'll point out is just that approver isn't generally a binary for the SIG, that if you're really experienced in a certain smaller area of the code base, it's not, we've definitely given out approver, for example, to the container manager, like topology and CPU pinning section of the code base to people who've worked on that a lot. So I think that's also a good strategy for being able to unblock smaller, more focused PRs.
Yeah. So Kevin, if you clues from NVIDIA, has approver rights on a number of sub elements in the tree. So yeah, really here we're just talking about top level approval to kubelet and command kubelet and probably test EDE node. But there's plenty of subtrees that if you're working in, we are more than happy to recognize that and give rights out to.
I just want to add that in the past, we actually successfully grow a lot of the people from to the reviewer and then to the approver. We've been doing this constantly, and also I personally actually kind of like the on purpose try to not using my approver power until leaded. Recently, there's maybe a lot more leaded compared to before, but over time, actually, a lot of time I don't need to perform my approver power because we do have many of the approver in the SIG node community in the past. So now we starving. We used to starving on the reviewer because most of the approver and also other reviewer. Now we kind of want to grow more on the both reviewer and also approver. Just share with the team here. Yeah. And there's another question from the Dean. And Dean want to see the regular triage meeting. Yes, we all agree. I think this is exactly I asked David to take the 15 minutes initially because we are still talk about how we have the regular, what's the procedure and the process to have the regular triage meeting, and we have to make the final decision yet. So this is why like the David's today is kind of the initial topic today. Yeah. Dirk, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think calendaring is hard, and we had a number of activities that we're trying to get ramped up that we didn't want to kind of take away the momentum on any of them, I guess I have a view, right? Like, so we have the CI health activity that we'll talk about afterwards. And then I had originally proposed the dedicated triage meeting, but then we thought, well, let's just make a standing 15 minutes on this meeting weekly to at least go through and report if anything stalled, and not be so oriented towards new feature discussion or issue discussion, that type of thing. So for the moment, I think across David, myself, and Seth, getting our calendars right, just dedicating 15 minutes here was our approach. And then for the CI stuff that we'll talk about, hopefully getting a readout from that group.
Sounds good, Derek. So quick question. So do you expect people to line up PRs during this section of the meeting if something is stalled?
Yeah, I think that would be great, right? So just, we're all here, right? So it's a good, we just want to have a standing block, 15 minutes to talk about health with SIG and issues that are being stalled or needing attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's just do it that way. We'll ask people if they are stuck, then come here, add it to the agenda, and then we'll, the initial 15 minutes, and we'll usually, if we do it at the end, most of the times we don't get around to it, right? So, and it falls off. That's why.
Yep.
Yeah, even just getting it linked in here as a thing to call out to go look at is often a helpful prod, far more than email for me. So
I just want to say that, Dan, we are not expected in that 15 minutes, we are going to approve a lot of things, right? So basically it's just get people's attention. So we want to take that, utilize that 15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, and then quickly turn around and find the reviewer and find what is the block and on the review process or the approval process. And not really, unless there's the technical attention, like we need to discussing, then we can like will be. But that 15 minutes most is for the get people's attention, right?
Absolutely, I totally understand that, Don. Agree.
Yeah, I just don't want to. We just kind of set. I just hope we can set expectation correct here. Yeah. So Derek and I will talk about more because last week we met and we haven't finalized those process yet. But this week we are going to continue that and discuss. Because last week we put more effort at discussing on the CI project. So David, any more you want to share with the community here?
No, I'll just say that this is intended as a first step, is getting on top of our PRs. I think getting on top of our issues will be a follow-up that will cross the test group of folks that have been working, as well as some of the other folks here.
Yeah. Okay, so any more questions? And
I got one last question. So it was mentioned that it will be okay with y'all to shadow approvers in order to become reviewers and approvers in different areas. How would you recommend that people actually go about that?
I think there's been a few folks that been trying to mentor via Slack. So just reaching out to one of us one-on-one is actually really helpful. I think we'd be happy to facilitate that. One of the things, like if I was to be completely honest, we have a lot of folks who will look at code and have a in some ways I feel too strong of a bias to say yes to contributions. And one of the things I know I've been trying to help a couple folks is to be comfortable saying no. And to me, being comfortable saying no is the clear dividing line on like, I actually am going to pay attention to this, this approver's interaction, right? Like it's really easy to LGTM things. It's harder to ultimately then go back and say, actually, no. And so what I would find interesting is like, if there are folks who are reviewing PRs, and they are uncomfortable figuring out how to say like, no, I don't really think this change adds much value, or it makes it more complicated, or the readability is harder. And they want guidance maybe on the best way of communicating that softly. That's like the key skill. I feel like it's hard to grow in the community, but I feel like it's a skill that I know both Seth, Don, and David and others who've worked in here, I think we feel like is really needed to get into that approval right. So there's a lot of folks who will say, hey, I LGTM'd a lot of these PRs and I did all these reviews. But then when I look in the details of the review, I never see any actual constructive criticism beyond generally this seems pretty good, right? So I think what I'm looking for is like, how do we get constructively provide criticism and are comfortable saying no as a thing, because ultimately it's our job as top level approvers to ensure that like our scope doesn't go unbounded. And so if folks have been participating in LGTM PRs and they want to talk about things that they think may or may not have been right or that type of thing, I think all of us would love to have that discussion. But for me personally, I find those I've been trying to train up now, and I won't name names here, they are too nice, I guess I would say. And I think sometimes it's fair to find polite ways of saying constructive criticism on changes. I don't know if others want to add on that, but to me, that's always been a key thing I looked for approvers in the SIG.
Yeah. Thanks, Derek. Derek shared this one, and I also want to share. In the past, we did turn down some approval, and because just too less, and because sometimes I personally feel like the really proud it is in the past 6 years I constructively turned down a lot of project, and another project when I look back. I do think about it is damage, could be damage our community, could damage our SIG Node reliability, and so that's really key and important pieces about being a leader, technical leader here, and it's easy to agree and without question and without challenge. So that's why that's the kind of the key part that we try to looking for to become of the approver, different from the reviewer. Yeah. So thanks, Derek brought this up. Yeah, because it actually used to be we have this many discussing before. Yeah. So let's move to next topic. And Sergey and Victor, do you want to talk about? Last week, a few of us get together, talk about the CI and the SIG Node reliability project, and then at the end we decided to name it as the SIG Node CI sub project. And Sergey and Victor, do you want to drive in the discussing here and share the doc with us?
Hi, I'm Sergey. I will start, and Victor jump at any moment. We didn't sync up this mention of the document, but yeah, I think we can just figure it out as we go. So SIG Node CI group is not something new. It's an effort that already been started before, and we've been when we say we, it's like I joined quite late, but we've been running test fixes and stuff like that for a while. And the big reason for that is that tests for SIG Node specifically started degrading, and it's just natural causes of degradation, and it's nothing that something bad was happening. It's a life, and our goal for this group is to be proactive and proactively maintain our test cases and keep the healthiness of code base. So this wouldn't be a challenge any longer. We want to keep releases stable and predictable. We want to improve test quality. We want to improve velocity of contributions. So all the PR validation tests will be stable. We want to improve test coverage, so more features will be covered with tests, and we'll be more confident in contributions that come into SIG Node. And we also want to fight the natural causes of test degradation, namely OS image support. So whenever new OS image comes, we need to support it. We need to adjust to the changing nature of life and what images being used widely, what tools are installed on the nodes and stuff like that. And we also want to improve test ROI. So we want to make sure that whatever test we run, we know why we run this test, and we have a clear understanding how we benefit from running this test and spending both like machine time and people time maintaining this tests active and healthy. So from execution standpoint, we want to restart our regular meetups. Right now, the plan is to do it Monday at 10 a.m. So it's time synchronized with East Coast and Europe a little bit, mostly with Europe, not Asia. We want to triage issues. We want to do some pull request reviews and bring to attention some reviews that are stale. We also want to run, besides the meetings, we want to run some image support and effort to improve the coverage of images. We want to both increase it where we need to increase it, and cut tests that are not testing anything, that maybe just running CPU cycles and don't bring actual verification. And we plan to work on some automation and tools to help our life, namely like alerts when release blocking test failing. We want to do some dashboards to better track PR pull requests and understand the code coverage for our tests. And finally, we want to improve documentation, so every new contribution will be easy, and we want to make sure that we know what test's doing. We have an easy way to figure it out, easy way to support it, and easy way to onboard new members to this effort. Yeah, so I think the actual call out here is to join this effort, try to contribute in the stability of SIG Node, and yeah, we welcome everybody. Victor, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you, Sergey. That was really good introduction to the, the new testing effort. I want to just say thank you, Ning. Ning, and Sergey, and I think Rory and Karan also, and probably David, met and did a lot of work on this document, which was really sort of picking up some of the CI efforts we had started earlier on, and they had tailed off. And so this is a formal effort to restart that. And I think that's great. One of the things I'm not quite sure of, when we look at this, is it seems like this is a formal charter thing, and I think there has to be some probably review and approval process, and I'm not quite sure how to move forward on that. But yeah, this is good. So can we speak to that for a minute, Dawn and Derek? Is I mean, is there some review approval process that we need to go through to form this charter?
Yes. Actually, I've been involved from the beginning when Ning and Victor have this idea. So I already reviewed the doc, and I also participated last week's meeting. I basically, yeah, there's the review process, like the before. We want to make this a formal sample project, and And we also want to eliminate elected. I think we already elected of the like the lead and drive that the two project. And but Derek and also Derek is looped into this one, and Derek and I is going to discuss this one. And Derek, do you want to add more?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some I's and T's we have to dot and cross to go through the formal sub-project process, but this is really covering things that are related to like testing of the kubelet sub-project itself, but then some of the supporting machinery around it that we can get the paperwork stuff settled. I think I'm understating how happy I am to see the help in getting this brought forward. So much of what's been identified here is fantastic, and I'm hoping that this can prove successful and can provide a daily readout on, or not a daily, I'm sorry, a weekly readout on how we're tracking as an overall SIG with health on this. The only thing I was thinking about after this is if some of the other sub-projects that were listed there could get better integrated in this process. So, but Dawn and I can trace that down afterwards. But I think this is long overdue. So a big thank you to all who were putting this forward.
I think that some of those old sub-projects maybe can consolidate or maybe deprecate it. So Derek and I go process those things together after this meeting. So then we will report back to the community if we things. And yeah, there's some of the paperwork we're going to pick up and then drive through offline. And so maybe we also need to see that how often the sub-project should be reported back to the SIG Node. Derek, we used to have like all the sub-project regularly, like the monthly, or some it is like even like bi-weekly report back to the SIG Node. Maybe we also need to finalize that process. And it used to be like a little bit like a menu. We poke up the people, say, oh, please come back to the SIG Node. And some is just nature because embedded in the SIG Node, the community meeting, because it's kind of daily stuff, like container runtime interface used to be like every week. They have the update status, and because everyone pay attention. So, but some is a little bit like the ad hoc, like the node problem detector. And I have to manually to poke engineer, say, oh, come back to SIG Node, at least like the monthly to report. So different effort have the different thing. Maybe we want to finalize something like that. At least report back.
I think for how David presented the overall health metrics for the primary, like I guess top level project of the SIG, I think it'd be good to pair up this group to output the current status in the beginning of every SIG call. And we can adjust as things go, but that seems to work just fine for me. Some of the other ones like CRI and stuff, they've, while they need to get out of this perpetual alpha state, they've also are seeing less churn. Whereas this is just, are we continually healthy?
One comment I would make is, I think in the previous meeting about the sub-project for CI, we had sort of said that the group would meet once every 2 weeks, and maybe if we're going to give an update every week, we might need to change that to weekly.
Yeah,
that's just a thought.
although I'm still hoping we can like resurrect some of the supporting tooling we had. Like, have we regressed on our performance? Like we had a performance dashboard that was being, I think Dawn, you had an intern or something that built that at one time.
Yes.
So I'm hoping we can have just a dashboard that we can very quickly look at our health.
Was this
doesn't require a greater bi-weekly or weekly meeting, Victor, but more just like a way that we can pull the health of the effort.
okay? Yeah, I think we maybe found that graph where it was spinning up kubelet pods and seeing how long it took them to spin up and stuff like that. Is that the graph you're referring to?
Yes, that's the load level per full test. built by my intern and then maintained by the Googler in the past. And but recently, last 1 year, almost like nobody really maintained that one. So that's why, yeah.
Yeah, I think Morgan, was the one that sort of found that, and we were asking questions like, who's looking at this thing, and before we make changes to test code, let's understand. So that's good, and that'll be good to get that revived and start looking at that to see how changes improve or hopefully don't decrease performance. So okay, good.
I just want to share, like in the past, a lot of the Kubernetes resource leakage issue and the Docker performance related issue actually is found by that dashboard. And we even find like one of the is like the couple release blocker related to the storage and the volume mounting and unmounting also found by that dashboard. Yeah, so.
There was a question on chat from Jorge, I think, asking whether we can have a doodle for meeting time. Meeting times are hard to schedule across such a big community. So Victor, let's chat about like meeting time, and maybe we need to send a doodle and collect more feedback on the timing. I think 10 p.m. on Monday worked before. We need to check whether we want to change it.
You mean it was, I think, 10 a.m. Pacific time, which would be like 1 Eastern time, and
yep.
Sure, maybe we can start with that, and we can start out and see if that's a good time, and folks can give us feedback. Otherwise, we won't ever have a meeting.
Maybe we have the form and ask the people, like they just sign on and they put the preferred time and the majority win. That's easier. And who wants to participate and we can propose several times and ask people to vote. That'd be easier. Otherwise, arbitrary is hard for us to decide it.
Okay, sure, we'll do that.
Okay.
Cool. So next one, and Vinay, do you want to? Oh, let me grant you the host access so you can share your slide.
Sure, thanks, John.
Oh God. Sergey, can you try to do that? I noticed that my laptop is just died. Too hot right now.
So who needs to be a co-host?
Okay. Oh, I can do it. I don't know. Sorry, just my machine is so slow today. Can you try, Vinay? I think I give you the.
It's still saying host disabled attendee screen sharing. Let me try it again. Yeah, not yet.
Let me try one more time. Sorry about this. Okay, I give up. My laptop is just.
So I have put that on Google Drive, and the SIG Node doc has a link to it. If you can pull it up and share your screen, that also works. I'll just talk through it. There's a PDF there.
Sergey, can you share, because my laptop is frozen right now. So, yeah, can you help to share the slides?
Let me just give the link in the chat. It's a lot easier that way. Find the doc.
I can grab it. Here you go.
All right. There. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I think David and Tim have been discussing this. I was looking into some other work for a little bit, and I came back to this. Uh, if I summarize correctly, it looks like there are two tracks, trains of thought that are going. One is to revert back to an earlier state where we had where resources allocated. The kubelet does some checkpoint maintaining. This is kind of, we discussed this about 3 weeks ago as a potential option where CPU manager is already doing it. And the other train is that we have preferred resources, a new field in the API pod spec, and that would enable the feature where you have okay, this is the minimum resources I need to be able to run, and this is my ideal resources. So I think it's we are at an impasse whether we should go with that or whether we should have kubelet checkpoint as far as Tim's point of view is concerned. David, is that accurate summary?
Yeah, I would just say that Tim doesn't think the field in the spec is justified by what we're getting out of it.
Yeah, I thought I read as much into it. So anyways, I kind of looked at that kubelet checkpointing code. I didn't get into deep details or try it out yet, but it seems like it's you create a structure around it, and there's a backing file it saves to, and there's seems to be some caching mechanism. Please let me know if I'm mistaken about any of these. So based on that, what I saw, I think I was looking at the following flow. We previously did this in an earlier iteration where resources allocated was in status, but we did not have a way to recover if it was lost. But let's say we go with the approach of having a checkpoint in the kubelet, similar to the CPU manager, the way it's doing. So essentially when a pod gets added, we store the pod, its name, its containers, and what its resources are at the time of admission. And that is your allocated. Now we reflect that back into the status contains, the container status contains two fields. One is the resources, which is the actual running state of the container. And there's a resources allocated, a resources list, a resource list type, which is the reservation that we agreed to based on the admission being successful. So that would be persisted in the state file and reflected by into the status allocated field this would yeah, it's a patch that happens in sync pod. So immediately as we determine that this is possible, yes, the resize can be admitted, we do the patch, and then the second we go the container, the runtime manager has a pod compute pod actions and sync pod where it looks for what the code is doing today using the spec field resources allocated. It does the same checks and it goes through, breaks down the updates that it needs to do, orders them correctly and all that stuff, and then calls the CRI update container resources where necessary. And the container status API will respond with the updated resources, the actual resources that's configured, configuration on the container by the runtime, and that gets reflected into the pod status and the update that goes to the API server. So this goes to status.resources. I should have mentioned status.resources over there. So if you please go to the next slide. So to summarize, I think the changes that we are looking at here is API pod spec. This is fundamental. We have the containers resources. It becomes mutable. We control to see that only CPU and memory are allowed to mutate at this time. We have a new object resources allocated in of type resource list in container status, and this is rediscovered from the state checkpoint state in case the status were lost. So it's something that we can recover. And we have the resources what's already there today, a resources field in the status, which is the actual running, the configured configuration on the container as reported by the runtime. So this, I think this would report, runtime today would report CPU reservation requests, CPU limits, and memory limits. We get the memory requests from the state. So that's the little detail there. and about handling kubelet start, restart. When we get a new pod, we come into handle pod addition, and we read the checkpoint state. If pod is found, then we use the resources allocated value that was saved, persisted. If not found, then we do the standard can admit pod and then admit or reject as we are doing today. And scheduler would have to use max. I believe we can get away with using status or resources allocated alone, but I'm not sure if the status is not available, what's going to happen during the time. Maybe we'll have to limit the user from modifying the resources on a pod that's not running yet, but that's not a great idea to me, because in our earlier prototype, one of the things that the JD.com, one of the companies that took our prototype and worked with it, did is they looked to see what pods were pending because of resources, tried reducing it while it's pending. So that's something, it's a use case that we'll have to say goodbye to if we did just resources allocated. We can go with this for now. Tim, there is a corner case where a malicious user can game the system and get more without paying for it. I kind of documented that in the thread that we have going with Tim on the revisit of the spec of the KEP. So I don't know, David, if you had a chance to read through that.
I didn't read. I looked at it briefly. I didn't actually try and reason through it myself.
Yeah,
but
it's a fairly, I think it's not a big concern in today's Kubernetes, where the entire cluster is owned by one. So if they're doing this, they're only hurting themselves. The cluster is hurting their own usage. But if we had a true multi-tenant, it's something we've been working on, a true multi-tenant Kubernetes system where the service provider has tenants using a single cluster and you need strict isolation, then this would become a concern. We cannot let gaming of the resources or any control by the user on how the resources are managed on any given node in the cluster. So we can read through it and discuss in detail on the thread.
The high level here is just that we're taking the field in the spec, putting it in a file on the node, and then putting it in the status.
Yes, that's the summary of this. Please let me know if I missed something, or I think I don't know what's the good step, but this looks like a viable option. That's what I just wanted to present at this point and leave it at that. So how do we approach this?
Willie, thank you for your share with this one. Yeah, and the team and I have been discussed. I understand where he came from, and after he talked to me, because he mostly is like the concern. This is he want to dedicate of the pod spec to represent the user configurations, user requirement.
Yeah.
That's why he is concerned about this resource allocated. It's kind of the generate automated by system and mess up the user config. I buy that intention, but it's like but the problem is today's pod spec actually already have a lot of things is defaulting by the system and generated by the automated by the system. So it's kind of the I like to move toward that direction, but on the other hand, for this particular using that this particular field using that one, I'm not sure because I want to see all the other complexity generated. But I want to ask you one thing. Why we absolutely need the checkpoint? I think we talked about this before, but can you help me refresh the memory on this one? Because Kubernetes start, and I saw even Kubernetes start. So you lose the history, right? So like Kubernetes history about the previous auto scaling states, but shouldn't that auto scaling controller have some way to checkpoint that states?
I think the concern here is, let's say everything is stable where you have added, let's say you have a pod which has 4 CPUs available, a node with 4 CPUs available. And then you have one pod that uses 3, and then another pod that's using 1. You have these 2 pods. So now the kubelet dies, and during the time kubelet is offline, the first pod, which is asked for 3, goes to 3.5. And then you come back up. If you don't have a way to recover, know what it was admitted at the resources allocated, that is essentially what it is. If we don't know this, then we'll say, okay, P1 3.5, I have capacity, I'll admit it. P2 comes and it asks for its 1, what it was admitted at initially. We say we're going to reject it because we don't have any room. So that's
It actually doesn't even have to be done while the kubelet is down. If there's just any pods that have pending resizes, then on restart, you would essentially end up accepting whatever the resize was and rejecting other pods that were previously running.
Right. So this is the this is the reason why it needs to be persisted somewhere where you can have a source of truth. This is what it was. And by putting it in the pod spec, we had a single source of truth, the API server, which Tim is against. And the other option is to use the checkpoint mechanism that's there in Kubelet today and achieve the same goal by moving this resources allocated field to status. In fact, the naming of resources allocated, if you recall, it was initially in status, and at that time we weren't aware of the need for handling the case where status is lost. That came up during one of the discussions, and then we moved it to spec, and I just didn't take the time to rename it to something more appropriate because resources allocated is more of a status sounding kind of thing rather than a spec, a desired spec or desired state. So that's my bad.
So then on the note you had for scheduler, I assume the same applies to quota here.
Quota.
You can actually do quota just on requests.
Yeah.
Since downsizes are essentially guaranteed to be accepted by the kubelet.
Why are downsizes guaranteed to be accepted?
At least downsizes in terms of requests are guaranteed to be admitted, rather, not actuated, but they're guaranteed to be admitted by the kubelet.
Yeah, we had max in an earlier iteration of the KEP, we had max for resource quota as well, but figured David kind of identified we didn't need it. There shouldn't be an extended period of time where the cluster resources, if you were to go with just the resources allocated, you would end up in a situation where you're giving more than the resource quota allows for an extended period of time.
Must be, this capability lets me size up and size down, right?
Yep.
Yes.
So why is the max not pertinent on size up for resource quota?
So
we
there's a trade-off here, or go ahead.
So yeah, if we allow this, okay.
I'm just resource quota being the literal cube object resource quota.
Right. If two very successive, okay, I see the point. We have to revisit this, David.
Yep. So Derek, but you can think about it two different ways. One is that if you enforce quota on essentially what the user has asked for, and only that, then there is a race where, for example, I lower the desired resources for pod A and then increase the desired resources for pod B. And those are not rejected by the quota controller or by quota because you did one and then the other. Of course, the kubelet on one node could accept or could admit and then run the resource increase before the kubelet on the other admits the resource decrease. But my contention is that it's generally a benign race, and we don't expect the kubelet to reject changes to resource requests that are downward. We expect those to be admitted. The alternative is that we could use max. The only thing that introduces that's a little bit strange is that then you could have the kubelet have status updates be rejected because it would violate quota. So then we would just have to be able to deal with, okay, if the kubelet accepts something, checkpoints it, and then tries to report it in status, now we have to figure out how to handle the edge case in which someone resized their pod, or no, it would be quite the series of events. I'll just say, I won't try and enumerate them, but I'm pretty sure you can end up in a scenario in which the kubelet would like to increase resources allocated for some pod somewhere, but that's prevented by
I guess my question
quota.
is, like, I agree the kubelet will accept downward changes, but
Yep.
it can't always realize those downward changes.
Yes, that's only for limits, right? So requests can always be realized, at least like CPU request changes.
I mean,
So
that might be dependent on the configuration of the kubelet, right?
yep, that is. So I'll also say that right now we don't, so we have two options. We can either try and serialize runtime changes with admission, which I think would make the kubelet hard to reason about. But that would be one option, is to say, okay, actually, the kubelet can't determine whether, or the kubelet can't fully admit you until it's ensured that it can actuate this resource resize. The current design essentially says that we'll admit you at a certain set of resources and use the it's like there's actually two benign races. One is a race between propagating requests to resources allocated. Like there's the race during admission that I talked about previously. There's also one during actuation in which it's possible that the container runtime could reject or just be unavailable or something and not be able to. Okay.
I guess all I'm calling out is quota lets you quota both requests and limits. And so I agree. And so all I'm asking is, like, if you have quotas on limits and you have quotas on requests, which many users in the world do to control like the ratio of overcommit, the line you have for the scheduler would need to apply to the quota system as well.
Okay.
So David, there is a case where, let's say it's one, not one downward and one upward, but two upward increases coming in quick succession before the kubelet on, say, the first pod, both are acceptable to the two pods, P1, P2, on two different nodes. And both are acceptable just looking at raw capacity. There's enough capacity for that. And your P1 comes and the kubelet grants it, but it hasn't had a chance to write to resources allocated yet because there's some delay in the watch. And a second request for P2 increase comes. If we are strictly looking at resources allocated, we're going to let it through, whereas we should really not be, right?
Right. So my suggestion was that for purposes of quota enforcement, that we use the desired resources, and for purposes of ensuring that a node is not overcommitted, the kubelet internally is using a checkpoint file, which is resources allocated, which is reflected in the status. And those two can differ. But I do agree with Derek. I had forgotten that you can do quotas on limits, to be honest. So I do think we will need to change the way that we do this for quota.
Max. Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe we can break it down. Well, it's simple to just use max.
I know we're at time.
Yeah.
Just I'm trying to make sure I get the iteration this is going. So we're saying we want to put allocation under status, and absence of that status, kubelet would still do local checkpointing.
Right.
Here's what I'm thinking.
And the reason for that local checkpoint was what?
In case we lose the resources allocated, if we don't know what it is, let's say it's in status, but we lose the status, it gets wiped, then we don't have a way for, if kubelet were to restart, we don't have a way to bring it back to the state of pre-restart if we did not have the information.
So if my kubelet had an extended period of disconnect from an API server and still had a workload running, and then the kubelet restarted, reconnected,
and resources allocated was lost because status was wiped. So there is a couple of fairly low probability, what to me seems like low probability ifs there that are going in. But we are, I think the principle is that if we didn't have a checkpointed way of recovering, we're violating API guidance.
Yeah, so we already have other checkpoints. That's fine. I know we eliminated one of them recently. We still have.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I looked into that. This is view manager.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm okay with either approach, this or the preferred that David brought up, and Tim. I think we are kind of undecided. Tim was wondering how to break this impasse. Should we get a lead from SIG Node lead to come and explain why that feature is so useful, or should we get a third reviewer? That's the questions Tim is asking right now. So, but I just wanted to present this approach and think through it, like chew on it, and I've not prototyped the checkpoint part of it, so I can't speak very confidently right now, but it looks like it might work. It's plausible, but you look at the approach and see if there's any holes that you can poke. Let's get this right.
Here's what I think, and here's what I'm thinking, and to unblock this project, because this project is important. Many people are waiting for this for a while, and it goes through. Actually, the checkpoint and the discussing also is proposed initially also, and also we are clearly told the community the status might be lost, and don't monitor and watch the status change, and to build your control plan and the logic on top of that one. We only limit of our Kubernetes provide the default controller. We are using those things. So I'm okay with to checkpoint to move forward. Even like I'm not really convinced, but I don't think about I think about the things we have that one. So I do agree, put off the spec. To deprecate is much harder. Include into the checkpoint, implement of the checkpoint, and put it into its status. At least there's the way, because we clearly tell, please don't depend on the status to the community. I know people violate that all the time, but at least we document that and clearly told the community. So to unblock this conversation, I'm totally okay with the checkpoint. How do you think about it?
I'm fine with the checkpoint. We need to ensure we're graceful about not failing in the absence of a checkpoint, because that's the only painful things we've had in the past around checkpoints. But I think I like the checkpoint probably better than the earlier iteration. I'm fine with having it in status. I think it's a nice user touch to let me know what the kubelet's actually acknowledged, and it's not actually live usage, so it's low rate. So at least what you have here, I think it's fine. The thing that bugs me a little bit on VPA is right now it's CPU and memory, but in the end, I'd like to be able to like grow it to be, other counted resources on the node, like PIDs or similar. And so I'm just looking at this thinking, Is there any detriment to that? And I can't think of any. So in general,
No.
I think what you got here seems pretty good.
As long as it's one of the supported fields in the resource list, we should be able to. And even for extended resources, at some point it can be added. I just didn't see a need for it. And I believe this question was asked in KubeCon, and Beata mentioned there was no asks. Nobody was asking for it, so they were not doing it.
If
This
we
would
are
actually,
to manage more resource, I think we need to think harder on the checkpoint format then.
Yeah, that's a detail that I have to work out. Yes.
Yeah.
so this will work just out of the box with extended resources, right? It's just that VPA doesn't manage those for you.
Correct. Not right now, at least.
Yeah.
We're going to block it in validation unless we really have a need for people to be doing it, allow it on careful validation. So that's the approach, conservative approach we can take. I know I'm exceeding your time, but yeah, please think through this, look at the design, and I'm gonna go through more details. And if there is anything I see, any fishy things, I'm gonna surface it immediately.
Willie, can you summarize what we agreed today at your PR so we can unblock and so Tim also poked me and a couple times to say, oh, we move forward. Like the whole the project want to move forward. He also want the project move forward. So we have to debate back and forth. Yeah. So there's a debate behind the things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at doing right now is using a node local checkpointing mechanism to persist CPU requests and CPU and memory resources, and so that if node were to restart, we have that information available and we can converge to that, and we reflect that into status container status dot resources allocated. The agreement that we have, okay, this is what we're going to provide in terms of requests, and the container status dot resources continues to present information that we query from the CRI. So I'll look into the details of the checkpointing mechanism, the file format, and things like that over the next few weeks, and work on it. Start working on it at least. But yeah, I think we can let Tim know we'll try this approach. This doesn't rule out having preferred resources at some point. We can always bring that in the future if we need it. But it's better we do it now rather than later if that's the desired way to do it, because already there are 3 fields that are resources in the whole pod spec. Is spec.resources and status.resources allocated, and then status.resources. We don't want one more. It kind of starts looking a little weird at that point.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Willie. And we ran out of time badly. And,
sorry for keeping people.
It's okay. So thank you everyone attended today's meeting, and see you folks next week.
Cool. Bye everyone.